dive straight into our definition. A/B testing is a form of randomized controlled experiment that compares two versions of, say, a web page, email, or an ad to see which version performs best. It then tests whether the observed difference is statistically significant. The idea has been around for 100 years or more, and the maths is the same. But we have access to real-time data today, and we can make rapid, iterative changes to online assets. We have a lot of tools that help us do this too, many of which are free to access. I would place a bet that you have taken part in one of these tests this very week without even knowing it. I could be running a test right now to see if humor increases my engagement rates. Unfortunately for you, you are in the placebo group. People are complex and they're driven by conscious and unconscious motivations. These tests allow us to observe the causal impact of individual changes on human behavior. For example, here we have our control, or A, which is the existing landing page. B is the treatment, which is the new version. Our working hypothesis is that making the Buy Now button bigger will improve conversions. We start with something that big and a primary success metric this broad so that we can then zoom in if we find something significant. At the heart of A/B testing, what we want to do is test the effectiveness of the treatment on a subset of users, with the assumption that this impact will generalize to the rest of the population, or audience if you prefer. So to get our test started, we split the traffic with some seeing A and some seeing B. So we have these two separate groups, and there is a misconception that it must always be a 50-50 split between the two. That's actually a challenge because you'll be paying sometimes for both of the treatment and the control, and often your control will be a placebo. So you're basically paying for people not to see your ad. That can be a bit of a challenge. But if you've done your sampling effectively, you can scale that down a little bit. Now that kind of trade-off is always involved. How can you balance having a large enough sample to be statistically significant and minimize the number of people who see the expensive but ineffective control? And how can you ensure that your control is as controlled as it should be? This comes into play on things like social networks, where people are influenced by their peers, and that can really interfere with the results. So the sample size, as a rule of thumb, is dictated by the variance that we detect in the overall population. The greater the variance, the larger the sample should be. And this also dictates the length of the test, but as a general rule of thumb, I would say 2 weeks as a minimum, so you can compare some weekly patterns. Now, if you wanted to test 2 or more variables, we start calling this a multivariate test. So for example, you might want to test the size of the button, the font, the color, and so on. You can test millions of things. To avoid this complexity, some prefer to run sequential tests where you would test size first, then color, then font. That makes things simpler, but it doesn't let you see how these factors interact with each other. So we can run multiple treatment groups at the same time, in the knowledge that the probability of false or unreliable discoveries will increase too. This has a straight knock-on effect on the significance level that you need to rule your findings significant. So the p-value that you'll be looking for will change, and you can calculate that easily in Excel using the t-test formula right here. I'll deal with that in my upcoming video series on statistics. So for now though, we can run a simple A/B test to see the difference the treatment has on behavior. If the hypothesis that we have is not rejected, we can then run the treatment on a larger group to see if the impact scales as we expected it to. If we have randomized and sampled appropriately, we should see similar results. So back to our definition. A/B testing is a form of randomized controlled experiment that compares two versions of a web page, email, or ad to see which version performs best. It then tests whether the observed difference is statistically significant. And you can follow and subscribe to see more of these videos. Thank you very much.